So the New York Times has a real eye-opening piece here on Israel's detailed and complex plan to try to effectively destroy freedom of speech in America. Let me walk you through this. The group behind Project 2025 has a plan to crush the pro-Palestinian movement. Even before President Trump was reelected, the Heritage Foundation, best known for Project 2025, set out to destroy pro-Palestinian activism in the U.S. So what they get into here, and we'll go through it, is there's a bunch of different players who are involved in this, right? The Israel lobby, right-wing think tanks, evangelical Christians, and others. And they came up with this idea that they're calling Project Esther. Okay? So let's learn about it here. In late April, the Heritage Foundation dispatched a team to Israel to meet with power players in Israeli politics, including the country's foreign and defense secretaries and the U.S. ambassador, Mike Huckabee. Now, by the way, Mike Huckabee is one of the most rabid Zionists in the country, and he's a hardcore end times apocalyptic evangelical Christian. So he wants to be buddy-buddy with Israel because in his religious conception, Israel will be the place where Jesus returns, but in order for that to happen, Israel needs to have all of the land and they need to get rid of the Palestinians, right? And then, by the way, when Jesus comes back, most of the Jews end up being killed, but Mike Huckabee doesn't care about that, of course. He wants his Lord and Savior to return, and he feels like, well, Palestinians are just getting in the way. So, insane Zionist. The conservative Washington-based think tank is best known for spearheading Project 2025, a proposed blueprint for President Trump's second term that called for reshaping the federal government and an extreme expansion of presidential power. Now the Heritage contingent was in Israel in part to discuss another contentious policy paper, Project Esther, the foundation's proposal to rapidly dismantle the pro-Palestine movement in the United States, along with its support at schools and universities, at progressive organizations, and in Congress. Drafted in the wake of Hamas's attack on Israel in 2023 and the mounting protests against the war in Gaza, Project Esther outlined an ambitious plan to fight anti-Semitism by branding a broad range of critics of Israel as, quote, effectively a terrorist support network, so that they could be deported, defunded, sued, fired, expelled, ostracized, and otherwise excluded from what is considered open society. Project Esther's architects envisioned outcomes that at the time might have seemed far-fetched. Curriculum it believed to be sympathetic to Hamas support, to a Hamas support narrative would be taken out of schools and universities, and supporting faculty would be removed. Social media would be purged of content deemed to be anti-Semitic. Institutions would lose public funding. Foreign students who push for Palestinian rights would have their visas revoked or be deported. Does this sound familiar to you? Because this should sound familiar to you. Mahmoud Khalil, Rumeysa Ozturk, others being basically arrested, and Mahmoud Khalil indefinitely detained to this point for being in favor of Palestinian rights and being against Israel's genocide. They had a detailed plan to, hey, we're going to make this happen. We are going to take away people's free speech. We're going to do everything we can to rebrand everything we don't like as anti-Semitism, even if it's not anti-Semitism. Jesus Christ. So this is Victoria Coates, a former deputy national security advisor and the vice president at the Heritage Foundation who oversees Project Esther. Take a good look at this woman's face. This woman is deeply anti-American. Oh, look, she has her Israeli and American flag here. Deeply anti-American, against the First Amendment, against the Constitution, wants to make sure you never criticize Israel. Once a sympathetic presidential administration was in place, the plan said, we will organize rapidly, take immediate action to stop the bleeding, and achieve all objectives within 2 years. Now, 4 months after Mr. Trump took office, Heritage Foundation leaders are taking an early victory lap. Since the inauguration, the White House and other Republicans have called for actions that appear to mirror more than half of Project Esther's proposals. A New York Times analysis shows, including threats to withhold billions in federal funding at universities and attempt to deport legal residents. By the way, the Trump regime literally wants to put these universities in some kind of federal conservatorship, where if you have a class that teaches the history of the region, teaches about Palestinian rights, teaches about the atrocities committed by Israel, they don't want to allow that. They want to censor that. They want to do their rewritten version of history where Israel's right about everything and the Palestinians are wrong about everything. In interviews with The Times, the Heritage Foundation's first public comments since Mr. Trump took office about his blueprint for shaping U.S. public opinion on Israel, Project Esther's architects said there were clear parallels between their plan and recent actions against universities and pro-Palestinian demonstrators on both the state and federal level. By the way, you all know this because we talked about it on this show, but you have people who are phenomenal students, did all of their work. They were banned from going to their final exams. They were banned from graduating because they decided to partake in an anti-genocide protest, to stand up on the moral issue of our time. Lives destroyed for standing up on the moral issue of our time. The head of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan, his bank accounts were frozen because he called a spade and said Netanyahu is committing war crimes and we have an arrest warrant for him. See how they cheapen anti-Semitism? There's real anti-Semitism in this world. Kanye West is going around saying he's a Nazi. Nick Fuentes is open about the fact that he's a Nazi. There's some genuine and sincere, deep anti-Semitism in this world. But instead of focusing on that, they take left-wingers who support Palestinian rights and are against genocide, and they say, you're the real anti-Semites. By the way, they go on in this article to say very clearly, they give the right-wing anti-Semitism a pass. They don't focus on the right-wing anti-Semitism. They don't focus on the rise of Nazism. They focus on left-wingers who support Palestinian rights. They admit it in this piece. Go read the whole piece and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. They also get into a lot of who the players are involved in this that made all these decisions. The phase we're in now is starting to execute some of the lines of effort in terms of legislation, legal and financial penalties for what we consider to be material support for terrorism. Keep that phrase in mind, because this is how deeply Orwellian this is. They would say outlets like this, where I just cover the news and give you guys what's happening on the ground in Gaza, right? They would say, you're doing material support for terrorism. Hey, you covered in detail when Israel murdered 15 paramedics and put them in a mass grave and also killed the first responders. We think that's anti-Semitic. We think that's material support for Hamas. This is how insane these people are. This is how Orwellian this is. Said Victoria Coates, a former deputy national security advisor to Mr. Trump and the vice president at Heritage who oversees Project Esther. Heritage officials said they did not know whether the White House, which has its own anti-Semitism task force, had used Project Esther as a guide. Oh, I'm sure. Administration officials declined to discuss it, but Robert Greenway, a Heritage national security director who co-authored Project Esther, said it was no coincidence that we called for a series of actions to take place privately and publicly, and they are now happening. Until now, key details about Project Esther, including the identities of its authors, had not been widely disclosed. The Times reviewed confidential records preceding Project Esther's release and interviewed Heritage employees. Members of the task force said that inspired the blueprint and others associated with the initiative to present a clear understanding of Project Esther's genesis, aims, and impact. So they go through, again, go read the whole article and you'll see all the different players in this thing. They go into the specifics. But understand something, guys. This is nothing short of an all-out war on the First Amendment in this country, and I can't help but say, at the moment, they're winning. I have no doubt when this gets to court and when this goes up the line, I think that the pro-Palestinian people will be vindicated, because I think there's no good faith reading of the Constitution and the First Amendment where this stuff is allowed. Having said that, we're always playing catch-up with the courts. It always takes a really, really long time. And in the meantime, lives are being ruined. People are being locked up with no due process. Again, think of Mahmoud Khalil. Think of Rumeysa Ozturk, who was recently released, thank goodness. But when they stop you from being able to graduate, when they take away your ability to take your final exam, when they put you on a blacklist so nobody hires you when you get out of school, they're ruining lives as a result of this. They're ruining lives as a result of this. And they have no concern, no care whatsoever for the guardrail or the lines that are provided by the First Amendment and the Constitution where, hey, certain things are free speech. No, what they say is, we turn it into a national security issue, and we say, anything we don't like from the pro-Palestine movement, that's material support for terrorism. So now, they have codified the trick that we knew was a trick all along. That if you talk about the war crimes of the IDF, if you talk about Netanyahu being a war criminal, if you talk about the occupation and settler colonialism and apartheid and ethnic cleansing and genocide, if you talk about these things, they say that is by definition anti-Semitic. That is by definition material support for Hamas. And now there are going to be legal consequences for you. I don't want to hear another fucking word from any of the people who pretended to be free speech warriors for years and years and years, where that was their main defining issue, and now they got dick to say about this. By the way, you got people like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan was just talking about how Kanye's Hail Hitler Nazi anthem that actually that's free speech and it's like totally fine. So you can talk about that and frame that as an issue around free speech when really he's just a mentally ill psychopath Nazi. But you got nothing to say about the actual assault on freedom of speech. If Kanye's thing was banned from some platforms, guess what? The platform, it wasn't the government that banned it. It was those individual platforms, right? In this instance, the literal government is trying to lock people up for criticizing Israel. And these people have dick to say about it. Ben Shapiro supports it. Dave Rubin supports it. Russell Brand hadn't said shit about it, but probably supports it. All these fucking people who pretended like they were heroes and care about the Constitution and free speech and a free press, etc. Well, look at this. The biggest actual assault on free speech in our lifetimes, where now, I don't know, if you criticize Israel a little too aggressively, if you say something that sounds not quite right about Hamas or the Houthis, sorry, we're going to lock you up because you're materially supporting terrorists, even though we know you're not doing that. This is disgusting. This is disgusting. And here we have a scenario where a foreign government, which is allegedly our ally, they now get to control speech in our country more than anybody else? Why? Why should they have that right? Why should they have that ability? Before this, we already had the anti-BDS laws where you can't get government money if you support boycotting Israel for their apartheid system over there. So in this country, you're allowed to boycott this country. You're allowed to boycott this country. You're allowed to criticize this country. But God forbid, you don't say the right words as you criticize Israel, and they can misconstrue it as support for terrorism, even though it's not. By the way, the reality of the situation is very clear. At this point, anybody who's supporting Israel, you are supporting terrorism. Because I've never seen a more clear terrorist government in my lifetime. 80 to 90% innocent civilians killed. Carpet bombing of schools and hospitals and UN buildings. The number of kids' bodies that I've seen blown up into pieces on the ground where a crying parent tries to put them back together and their whole life is shattered. If you support that, yes, you support terrorism. It's not the pro-Palestine students. It's not the anti-genocide protesters. It's not the people who say from the river to the sea. It is you. If you support the Israeli government right now, you are supporting terrorism. Full stop. That's why you have every human rights group under the sun is all saying it's a genocide. Every genocide scholar now is all saying it's a genocide. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, everybody who actually looks at the evidence goes, yeah, these are war crimes. This is a genocide. Everyone. But you're going to legally go after the critics who've been right all along about everything. Project Esther is, let's call it what it is. It's the Heritage Foundation, it's the Israel Lobby, and it's Israel officially declaring war on the United States of America and trying to destroy the First Amendment and free speech in this country. And if you're not with us in fighting back against it, you're against us. And that's duly noted. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.